And welcome to the DevSec 2023 podcast, sponsored by our good friends at Cisco. What a pleasure it is to be here on the trade show floor. Every year, DevSec gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm Alan Dale. With me, as always, my good buddy Jerry Carew. We are Gale Force Winds. Stephanie, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. First time you've been on our podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Absolutely. So I am the CEO of DiversityNL. My pronouns are she, her, and her, so Stephanie Howlett. So it's all about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So what can organizations do to basically look at inclusion? You know, what does that look like for you as an owner? What does that look like for you as an employee? What does that look like for you as a person? So getting into training sessions, getting into land acknowledgements, getting into your pronoun usage, getting into all the things that we need to do to make people feel welcomed.
It is certainly important that people do feel welcome, and I know that this sector, this industry, they put a priority on it. They try to understand it first and foremost, and then kind of amplify it to the membership and make it meaningful. What do you think of the sector generally from what you've seen so far?
I think that the sector is acknowledging that there's work to be done, and they're starting to, put some good steps forward doing that work. Today there's a session all about what you can do with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So looking at people's individual responsibilities and what we can do. Males are our best allies as women and underrepresented groups. So how can males, step forward and help amplify our voices? Looking at sponsorships, mentorships, looking at how you can help us within companies just get to the next steps and the next levels.
Stephanie, this oftentimes can be a confusing, complicated topic, right? For many people to navigate through. They want to do the right thing, say the right thing, be the right thing, be that ally that you so rightly describe. What are some tips that you can give people or some myths that you can bust through this?
Yeah, so I think the best step is really looking at, what we're doing as people. Like if you're a leader, looking at your metrics within your organization, like measuring who's in our organization, what voices around this table aren't here, like who needs to be heard, who needs to be seen. Looking at, do you have employee resource groups? Looking at forming those, looking at really making meaningful work, supporting different historically excluded organizations and people like, women, Indigenous, persons with disabilities, racialized, 2S LGBTQ communities, like how are we supporting those folks in general within our organizations? So it's messy work. There's no such thing as perfection, but we need to take the next step. And organizations, I agree, they're afraid of doing something wrong. But there's not a wrong. The wrong is when you don't take the next step. Because the business case is there. When you have 39% more customer service satisfaction, that's massive. When you have 50% more engagement, 27% more profitability. Why would you not want to do these things?
Yeah, you're so accurate that business is nervous to step forward for fear that they might do something wrong. What would you tell them? How would you help them cross that chasm and get going?
Yeah, I really think it's being vulnerable, looking at our privileges, starting where we're to, like really acknowledging them, which is tough. Because when we start looking at privilege, people think we're trying to take away the hard work you did, but it's not. It's what don't you have to think about as a person. So for instance, I'm a settler, right? Our Indigenous peoples were on the land way before I was, way before we took away the lands. So like, what is it that we're doing for our Indigenous communities? Like, how are we doing that? And that brings me to the Moose High campaign. I wear these every time I do a talk, talking about gender-based violence, looking at our Indigenous communities, like what can we do? And I have one of those for each of you to put in to have a look at. So like what are we doing for different communities that are historically excluded? Like what are next steps that we can do? Like forming those robust relationships, taking the time out to go meet people where they're to, listen to their stories, like you're doing. Like this is a great way to listen to people's stories. How are we doing business? And it looks different in different places with different people.
DiversityNL, tell us a little bit about that organization specifically.
Yeah, so I started DiversityNL 2 days before the pandemic. Which has been brilliant. Most people are like, ooh, I don't know, but like it has been because I get to connect with people, right? I get to have interesting stories, conversations. We look at strategies, we look at training sessions, we look at forming employee resource groups, we look at the way people are doing business. How can we change those? How can we look at things differently? Really starting where you're to as an organization and going from there. Helping you depending, because every organization's in a different spot. So like, how can I help you as facilitate that change? And it is small steps, big changes.
Stephanie, but what prompted you to create that? I mean, there's other organizations out there trying to do some similar things. but you seem really motivated. Your posts on LinkedIn and that are very positive. What prompted you to do this?
Yeah, so as a queer person, I saw that there was a need for this. I come from healthcare, 19 years in healthcare. I didn't always feel included. I didn't always feel that my voice was heard. So
Right.
I see your Generation Z's, millennials, coming into our workplaces and leaving within short periods of time. So I want to help organizations create that change so people are staying, like truly staying. And it's very costly when a HR person or organization is constantly putting out job advertisements. Like, it's costly. People are leaving to go to organizations because they don't feel included. They don't feel their voices are heard, right? They don't feel that they get to have a say, period.
Stephanie, many people, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, would be struggling to get that first step. How do they reach out and contact you and tap into your brain, get into your orbit, and help them make that first step? Because this is important work. This needs to be done. It makes good business sense to do it. They need people like you. How do they get you?
So Stephanie at DiversityNL.com, or look me in on LinkedIn. I can be found, or www.diversitynl.com is my website.
Right on.
Connect in.
That's a fantastic conversation. Important work you're doing. We appreciate you very much. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to connect.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Oh, I should have, Jerry, before you hit stop, I should explain to the audience that's not from Newfoundland, start where you're to means like where you are in the moment. We're all from Newfoundland, so we get it.
Absolutely.
But not everybody would get start where you're to. What does she mean?
Yeah.
Now we got it.
Start where you're doing it and come where you're at.
Come where you're at.
That's a whole other
100%.
podcast.
Oh, it
getting
is.
into
It
this.
is. Stay tuned. Part 2.
Part 2.